Hey, David Wood here, and welcome to my extra mile. Today's show is all about money mindset, but it's all about that. How do you create the behaviors, the elegance, the mindset, and the daily rituals and habits to create financial success? Well, our four guests are all experts in their own way. Lloyd Ross, Andrew Logan, Sean Owen, and the unbelievable, we call her Coco, Courtney Bouchard. So enjoy the show. You know what to do. Click, 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 click. And please share with your friends and get involved with the comments and let us know exactly how you utilize this stuff to make changes in your own financial life. Enjoy the show, everyone, and we'll see you on the other side. And I've got four really beautiful people that I care very, very deeply about. And we're going to talk about a subject which a lot of people don't like to talk about: money. And here they are: Sean Owen from Nanaimo. I've got Coco, Courtney, who's from Vernon, British Columbia, and our two Aussies, Andrew and Lloyd. If you haven't listened to the first show, I urge you to go back and listen to it. It's a bit long, but you may want to pause it and then come back, listen to what's there. There's so much gold there. And what we realized is, and we started the last show with, Courtney said something which just struck me, is that, you know, people are more comfortable talking about sex than they are about money. And so we really want to change that. We want to have these really deep and rich conversations regarding money. And we want to weave that in this week with sort of network marketing, but giving you sort of real life examples, real strategies, and small everyday steps that you can implement. So Sean, I'm going to start with you. Just because I reached out to you this week and said, hey, listen, you know, what was some of the things you'd love to talk about this week on this particular show? And and guys, I want you to feel like this is all of us talking. So we'll jump in with each other. You can ask me questions. I'll ask you questions, vice versa. Just really have that conversation. But Sean, what are those, you know, what are some of the small steps that you take that you think a lot of people miss that really sort of do add that real sense of financial control, that you really understand money and you really, you know, you're able to live without that sort of impending pressure, even though you've gone through the natural peaks and valleys of job changes or career changes and income moving from high to low? What's some of the things that you sort of adopted?
Yeah, you know, I think in the first call, we talked a lot about really the essence that came out of two books that were pretty pivotal, I think, for all of us. One being Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Kiyosaki, and one, The Richest Man in Babylon. And, you know, I think that one thing I've always thought about, like, what can anybody do, you know, no matter what age, to start building wealth and start to really think, I guess, set yourself up to be able to do some of the things that you want to do, whether that be investing or just feel the security of having some cash flow, as opposed to always feeling like there's some debt there. And something that I, you know, when I was teaching way back when and reading, you know, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and trying to figure out how to put a little bit of money. Because I always had this, I don't know how many people have the conversation, like, I'd love to do that, but I just can't afford it. Like, I might have my bills, I have my kids, you know, I pay for my groceries. Like, where do I find this money? And when I read The Richest Man in Babylon, and it talked about the concept of paying yourself first, like, just pay yourself first and create that financial freedom account and put 10% of what you owe or what you earn into an account. Like, before anything else happens, pay yourself first. Everybody else comes behind you, you know, whether it's your electricity, whether it's, you know, some of the bills, like, they can all just wait until you pay yourself. 10%, you know, like, it can be a really small number. You know, if my daughter has a $40 paycheck, you know, that's $4. But the idea that every time, I just learned from that moment, I made a commitment that every time I made an income of some level, I'd put 10% into my financial freedom account. And that idea that the financial freedom account is set there so that I can use it to create more cash flow. It isn't to save up for a boat, or it isn't for me to save up for a car. It's there to be able to get working for me so that I can invest and do things. Because, you know, up until that time, I was like 38 years old. I had never put money into an RSP. I'd never planned for any kind of a retirement, like any kind of security. I just had not been able to do it, you know, but being able to employ a little strategy like that, I was able to amass, you know, some savings, something in a financial freedom account. And I passed that on to other friends. When I went out of teaching, even into my sales staff that I had when I went into corporate, some of them took that on, just the simple idea of 10%. And they would come back a couple of years later. I didn't even know they actually did what I suggested they do. And they had amassed close to $100,000 in money that they didn't notice that they didn't have, you know, and they were so blown away. And anyway, I think that's one thing that I think of, David, that it's just a small thing, but I think
it's simple. And like you said, it's easier to start early. And when and like you say, with a $40 check, $4, get in the habit of saving that 10%. For me, it was the Wealthy Barber is where that concept came to me. And I remember reading the Wealthy Barber, and that's where I'm saying, okay, right, you know, paying myself first is that number one thing. But Colt, let me come over to you, because I know that, you know, you just have a really solid sort of strategy around money. And it's not like you were making massive bucks, but you have always been so careful and clever. I say clever because we talked about that in the first show, so I won't go there. But what do you say is some of your daily strategies, or do you want to sort of expand more on what Sean has talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I thought of when Sean said that is the same thing, and I think it was The Wealthy Barber. I love that book. Is that you don't notice it. If you just take it off, that $4 or whatever it is, right away, right off the paycheck, you're not even going to notice the difference. And so how magic is that? You can take a one-time action to set up the auto transfer with your bank, and it's done. You never think about it again. And that's the best thing that you can do with investing, really, is to try to set it and forget it, because then otherwise you're watching all the changes and you're getting nervous and emotional, and you're basing your decisions on emotions. So a lot of things I did when I was younger is, luckily, Sean, I maybe came from a home where my mom was very frugal, and I somehow took that on and started setting money aside early. And I realized, geez, living at home is going to be the cheapest rent I ever have.
I hope my son's not watching this.
I started putting money away when I was a teenager. And so that's where I had time on my side. But also I was just aware, I guess, because of that frugality growing up, that gave me that awareness, and then that ability to really choose what I was going to do with my money. And so I kind of had to come from the other side of the four money types. I was more of a hoarder, and I loved to watch it grow and grow, and then I wouldn't treat myself even to maybe a cup of coffee. so I sort of had to balance that out. But yeah, it's just basically giving yourself that awareness so that then you have choice. And I think most people do a lot of things with money unconsciously. And so just being a bit more aware and realizing that when I make this choice to buy this cup of coffee, I'm taking away a different choice. And it's okay to do that. You know, it's just like a food journal. I think I mentioned that before. It's like tracking. If you decide you've got this many calories, you might choose to drink it in a rich drink, but I would choose a chocolate cake. So, you know, at least just having that awareness, I think, is a huge piece.
Awareness is so key. And I think that, you know, I just want to mention the four archetypes that you were talking about, which is, you mentioned the hoarder, there's the money monk, the spender, and the avoider. And unfortunately for me, I was kind of in the avoider spender category. So again, I started learning about money because my mother spent every dollar and more than she ever had, bought most things on finance, you know. And so, yeah, my education was pretty low there. Lloydie, what's coming up for you?
I love all this stuff. What I agree wholeheartedly with what Sean mentioned at the start, and obviously what Courtney was talking about as well. Reading The Richest Man in Babylon, I learned to set aside 10% and pay myself first. So I started to treat all of my income as mine, and then I would like pay out the people I thought needed it, which helped me to save like 20 or 30%. And then looking at Courtney's.
Hold on. Repeat that again so people got that. So,
I actually treat all of the money that I get as pay myself first, and then I pay
I see.
out. So everything's a saving. Everything goes in my savings account, then I pay out others. So I'm like trying to pay myself the most first, for reasons I'll touch on in 1 second. But I learned that from The Richest Man in Babylon. And then with Courtney, I grew up with a dad who was a spender, avoider, and a mom who was a hoarder. So I was like getting pulled in these two directions. Like, I don't know which. So I had this, had to decide on who I was going to kind of model. And I eventually probably leaned towards my mom, because it seemed like she had less stress in her life. So I've grown up now. I've switched from spender to hoarder probably, looking at the archetypes. But what I understand from reading is that the money you save today is not the same amount of money it is today. It's compounded into the future at a certain rate of return. So if you go and buy 5 coffees a week, it's $20, let's say. If you compound that into the future, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And that concept of compound interest that a lot of people don't understand is the power of money when it's working for you. So understanding that, what I do, touching on what Courtney said about you don't notice it if you're doing it properly, if you're just setting aside the money. I just have an app that I discovered, a friend of mine referred to me, and I mentioned it on the last one, called Acorns in in North America, it's called Acorns. In Australia, it's called Raise. And what it does is it automates this whole process. So like I looked at my Raise recently and it's got $500 in. I just reset it recently and it's got $500 in there already. But what's clever about it is it not only, as you buy your coffees, it actually rounds up the spare change and puts it straight into this account. So you can actually spend and save at the same time. And then it puts it into the markets, which means it actually invests it automatically for you. So you're starting to get that compounding effect. So I guess the lesson is these concepts can be automated these days with technology, which is super helpful because 80% of finance is behavioral. And it's like, we can't trust ourselves to do it. So I was like, let's just put it in the hands of an app that does it for us. And I think to date, like I remember putting this on my stories, and I reckon I've helped maybe 100 people save 1,000 or more and haven't invested. And they keep sending me screenshots like, here, I've done this. So it's like the very first step of doing that. So I think that's been, automating these principles from the books has been a really helpful tactic.
Yeah. Andrew?
Batting cleanup. Obviously, I think it's all really been said very well. I think you're right. I mean, if we cycle back 15 years ago, and I only had this conversation with someone the other day, and it's like, oh, you guys are so lucky now, and I'm like, there's immense gratitude for what we have, but let me tell you what life was like, 15, 20 years ago, and when I didn't have any money, and when I was struggling to rub 2 cents together, I knew that the actions and the result are 3 to 4 steps down the path. The mindset and the habits are what you have to work on first. And so I didn't have any money when I was 22, 23. So I was going to the library, and podcasts weren't a really big thing there now, but, Audible, podcasts, the local library, you can be putting those jigsaw pieces into your head right now. So as Sean says, like, if there's only $40 each week, but you've gone to the library and you've read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Richest Man in Babylon, Millionaire Mindset, like some of these, you read half a dozen books for a 10-cent late fee and you've got $1 million financial mindset while you've got that $40 in your pocket. You're already so far ahead of the game. And then as Lloydie said, when you truly understand the power of putting your money to work, then you do sit there. And so I spoke in the last program about how I just chose not to buy a car until I bought a couple of investments in a business, because I knew that, I could ride my bike and I could save that $100 a week. And it wasn't that I couldn't afford it if I had to have a car. I just knew that $100 a week 15 years ago could be worth $1,000 a week now. And so when you truly understand that, it's not hard to suddenly say no to the coffees. Because the coffee, like as you put your card over to tap, that this isn't actually costing you $5, it's costing you $50. And then it's suddenly like, actually, I don't need that coffee, or whatever it is, whatever it is for you that day. When you truly understand compounding interest and putting money to work, it's so much easier to stay on track with your financial goals, because you know that every dollar you spend today is $100,000 that you don't have down the track.
Yeah, I thought Lloyd had put a time clock on your talking because I heard a little chime go off. All right, Andrew. But I think it's just such a great conversation. I think that, again, we keep hearing about coffee, but it may not be coffee. It may be a lot of different things. I just want to get your mind out of that. Oh, I got to give up. It's not a question of giving up. It's a question of planning so you can have just an incredible life versus what most people are struggling with today. I mean, I just heard a stat, was it yesterday, about, the population of, I'm talking about America. I know this is going around the world, but, the average person has less than $400 in savings. I mean, that's just an incredible stat to sort of to think about. Let's talk about this, Sean, how we get in the bad habits. I know some of it's, genetic and, you're sort of passed down. Obviously, it can be relearned. It's just kind of what we saw, what we heard, what we experienced around money. But this whole tap thing, I think people are disconnected. In the old days, you carry money around and you could kind of see your wallet getting thinner. But with credit cards, it just feels like, it's almost like, oh, I'll just get another credit card. Oh, I just get another credit card. And that it seems like the whole world's set up to get the average person into debt and keep them in debt and convince them that debt's a good thing. And one of the top 10 questions that I pulled off before the show was, how much debt is bad, or how much debt is too much debt. But can you talk a little bit about that, about habits around credit cards? Do you have any tips for yourself, for your family? Or
Yeah, the idea of, so for me, I was probably, maybe I'm a bit on the hoarder side too. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've done that course, but I think about credit card debt. I just hate having to pay interest or to pay anybody else any amount, like taxes, credit, like any kind of interest rates. Like, I just hate them. So it just feels like, money's just pouring out. So I'm always wondering, how badly do I want it? And like Andrew said, I'm more of a, well, when I have the cash, I'll buy it. There's a few exceptions. But I just look at the percentages. Like, credit cards are so high, 19, 20, 24%. Like, it is so incredible. People don't even understand what interest means when it's compounded annually or monthly, or, it's just and then you pay your minimum, and every time I go into my bank account, I get an offer. Like, they're so generous. It's incredible how generous. They're throwing money. Hey, is there any chance I can increase your credit limit? Like $10,000. And one of the things that Carrie Lynn and I have done for years, like, we never carried a balance on our credit card. So we use credit card all the time, but we pay 100% of it off every month. We'll collect our points and do our thing. But a credit card company doesn't take interest from us, because we just look at it that way. But when I look at family and friends and different people, like, credit card just seems to be one of those things that it's used for convenience. It's used for compounding the wrong way. Like what he said, like, it's just like, I want this now, I got it, and then I pay the minimum, or I'll pay maybe even a bit more than the minimum. And we don't realize the trap that we start to fall into, where we become really a servant to some of that debt. And it's so much pressure. And I've worked with a number of people who have, they've taken credit cards to pay this credit card, and it's just absolutely, to me, it's just unbelievable. And then you look at the consolidation people, David, I mean, it just goes so far, right? But it's always, for me, it's about, what can I do even for good debt? It's like, how do I redirect the debt so that it's the lowest percentage possible? And then always working to pay it. That is the priority to pay off.
Yeah, I love the zero interest. It's just a great philosophy. You talked you hinted at something, and I'll bring it over to you, Court, about using credit cards to your advantage, because I use my credit card for everything, and like you, pay it off because I'm collecting the points for free travel. So for me, the idea that the credit card is kind of giving me something back, and I'm not giving the interest. Court, what's your sort of philosophies around credit cards or debt in general?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I use it the same way. It's a tool. So you're using it to gain those points or whatever works for you, but paying it off every month. And it's just about that understanding and education of how to use it. And most people never get that taught to them. So it's, it's kind of sad because it can get out of control pretty fast.
But you, I mean, I get this sense with you because, you know, you're sort of at a different stage now with 2 young children. I know you recently bought a car, like a nicer car, because safety is important for the kids. I'm guessing, you know, you paid for it, just knowing you, right? But also with the house, I mean, do you have, is there good debt that you obviously, you know, we own property together. I'm just wondering, you know, so there really is those two elements, right? Good debt and bad debt, right?
Yeah. And you I guess, have to choose what you're comfortable with. And again, it's that awareness. For me, I'm similar to these guys in that you save up before you make that purchase. So it's again, just having that discipline and that awareness and understanding that's kind of how it works. And just deciding that you're going to redirect and save until you can get to that place. So with my vehicle, you know, before this, I always had secondhand vehicles, and I saved up the money for them and I bought them. And I happened to do that with my new van as well. Whether that's, you know, you can look at whether leasing or things like that, you know, make sense. But again, evaluating that. So for me, I liked not having payments and just knowing that was looked after. And with houses, like it's always 20% down. And the shortest period of time for your mortgage as well, because just like credit cards, the longer your mortgage is, the more that you're paying in interest. So again, it's just making those choices and realizing it's your money and that's where it's going.
Yeah, and sort of adding up the extra payment and being able to do your, you know, lump sum payment once a year, all those things are strategies that you use. So you're talking about shortening the gap of that mortgage term, right? And how great is it? I mean, you've experienced it. I've experienced it. I think a lot of us have, you know, where you paid off an entire mortgage and now it's free and clear, right? I mean, it's just an incredible feeling.
Yeah, that would be, I guess, that's the feeling most people would have when they become debt free, I suppose, right? Like, wow, that feels great. That's exciting. And it's like this newfound money too, right? So, just getting excited about something like that versus the purchase right away, right? So trying to get your mind excited about the longer term goal and then have that discipline.
Yeah. Lloydie?
You know, David, if I can just chime in on that, I'd love to just, you know, it brought something up for me because I think about this game that we play. I know we all have investments and we'll choose to do certain things with our money, but you know, when I think of paying down my mortgage, you know, I've negotiated pretty low rates. So, you know, we always will pay, you know, our mortgage and then a little bit on top, or that's the idea. But then something in my mind is always like, yeah, but you know, do I really want to, like, if I keep pooling this money, do I want to aggressively pay down my mortgage? Or if I'm at 2.5%, let's say right now on my mortgage, can I make 7% on an investment or 8% on an investment? So if I put the money to work, instead of putting it against a 2.5% debt, I'm making it work for 7% return. In my head, I'm coming ahead like 4.5%. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's, a bit of this game, you know. I know that might take us in a different direction.
Oh, no, I love it, but I want to give you and again, we'll talk, it's just conversation. So guys, jump in. Don't wait to be asked to come in if you've got something to say. But I was at an interview with 3 billionaires, and they had all lost, and they'd all gained, and they'd all lost over their sort of careers. And they were giving financial advice, and this struck me, and they said this: pay off the castle. Keep the castle safe, because if something happens and you lose everything, the home castle where the kids are and the family and all of that is intact. So that I get what you're doing, because we do the same thing, but we do it with our rental properties where we'll leverage them and we'll take the money out and use that money to go buy something else. We get a high percent interest. But I really love that advice, and it really struck with me, having seen these 3 successful guys, and one of them really got emotional talking about when he lost the family home. Because, you know, I mean, the world went upside down and he just lost everything. So he went from being a very wealthy guy to very broke and then having to start over. And again, he still had the money mindset. So he was able to recover and become a billionaire, but losing that family home, that was his advice. So just open up that.
Yeah, I think Lloydie talked earlier, Dave, about, you know, compound interest and understanding that, you know, the $50 now that you can put to work. And compound interest is a double-edged sword, right? It works both ways. That there's certainly that $50 of debt. If you don't know how to manage it and you can't afford it, you've overextended yourself with debt. That $50 suddenly becomes $500 the other way. And that's what people need to understand. So I remember when I had my physio practice, I used to have this kind of this paradox as their boss, but also as a human trying to help people with their life. Because the first thing people do when you employ them, the physiotherapists, they generally come out of university on quite a good $70,000 to $80,000, and the first thing they want to do is get the car. And they're like, oh, I'm going to, now that I've had 2 paychecks, I'm going to buy this fancy car, because they're all, they're young and they're straight out of uni. And you'd have this paradox where you're like, I really want you to get in debt, because then I know you're not leaving. Then I know you're like, slave to the wage for a while. So I've got this employee for the next few years. But then as their human boss, you're sitting there like saying to them, do you understand that this car now, that is, that compound of the debt that you're getting yourself into already, and the missed opportunity costs that you will have later in life because of this one decision now, and you're trying to have that conversation with them. So for us, like yourself, it is, we are happy to go into debt for property as an investment debt. However, all the sums are made, all the calculations are made. We're sitting down with the bank and the accountant and making sure that that is not a debt that is going to take us backwards. That is a debt that will take us forward, because it'll allow us to, purchase properties that make us money. But as you say, like the home that we've bought, it's all about getting in and hammering that loan down and getting rid of that debt, because that debt doesn't service us. The debt on the investments does. The debt on the house doesn't service it. So we do everything we can to pay that one off ASAP. But it's just understanding the two sides of the coin, understanding compound interest can work for you and it can work against you. It comes down to, again, just educating ourselves and having that mindset on why we're going into debt.
Awesome. Lloyd?
Agree with all these guys. Echoing just again what Sean said earlier about how he looks at allocating capital. To answer the question about what's good debt, what's bad debt, when is debt good to use? The only time you really should employ debt or use debt is when you can actually take that money and create a return that's higher than the interest rate on the debt. So for example, if you borrow $1 million, whatever amount, doesn't really matter. If you're paying interest on whatever amount you borrow, let's say the interest rate on the debt is 3%, can you take that money and put it to work at 5, 6, 7, or 8%? Because if you can, do it. And do it if you can do it safely, do it. And I had a friend recently say, should I use my superannuation for paying off credit card debt? And I think the thing with credit card debt is that it's usually about 20%. And the reason why,
just so people know what superannuation is, because a lot of them
401k, like 401k,
RRSP. Okay.
Yeah. So it's interesting because the superannuation or 401k, it might get 6 to 7, maybe 5% after fees annually as a return. And then over on this side, you've got a credit card that's taking 20% from you every month. It makes sense to take out that money that's producing 7% for you and pop it into a credit card that's costing you 20%, because you're making 13% gain on every dollar you put in that credit card from the other investment. So I think you have to just be smart about, okay, I'm going to take out the debt, but how can I make this money work for me at a higher interest rate than what the debt is costing me? And that lesson, like if people learn that lesson very fast, there'll be very few things that they'll be using debt for that doesn't produce income. I did have a friend though, he bought a guy I know, he's not so much a friend, acquaintance, bought a Lamborghini, $400,000, financed it. And it's interesting because it's perspective. Now, all of us on the call would be like, brand new Lamborghini, don't know if I want to finance that for $400,000. It's gonna be hard to deploy the capital in something that's gonna produce. But what happened to him was the car put him in positions to meet people, and he created a business idea that gave him $400,000 quite quickly. So I guess you could look at it as he got the debt and created a return a lot higher than what the debt was costing him. So it is relative to anything. Anytime you get debt, you can create opportunity.
I can just hear somebody sitting there with his wife right now saying, baby, we need to buy a Lamborghini. If we do, I'm going to meet some right people, and we got it made. Do not do that, people.
It's a risky one. Yeah.
Cool. I want to ask you a question. Again, anyone jump in, but the thing about houses, for example, most people have made money through the acquisition of property. However, you know, I see a lot of people who really would be better off renting, because, you know, a home isn't always an asset. You know, the roof breaks, everything needs fixing. They can be incredibly expensive. And so there's people starting out. What's your thoughts around maybe renting versus owning? I know you rented for a lot of years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the market really changes a lot too. So when we were renting, it was very favorable for renters because we were able to live in a property that at the time we wouldn't have been able to afford to buy. So our lifestyle was great, our rent was low, and our stress was low. So we could really focus on putting it towards other things and saving up for when we purchased that property. But then, you know, a few years later, the rental rates had gone up a bit and the availability was not good. So we were like, okay, now we're going to buy because this isn't looking as favorable. So yeah, I think again, like it would be doing those calculations, like you said, with the mortgage and the interest payments and whatnot. And because if you're going to purchase a house with, you know, the lowest down 5% and you've got a 35-year mortgage, like, and it's not your forever home, but, you know, you might want to question that. So,
well, you could do what you did, and we did it together. You could be renting and own a little rental property, you know, that's starting you out. You're not actually living in that house, but you've got a cash positive return, right? That's
exactly.
That's the thought, right?
Yeah. Finding a property that can make that happen. I think a lot of times people unconsciously purchase real estate because that used to be the way, right? Like it just always made sense. Whatever property was always going to increase in value. And just like back in the day, it used to be, you know, go to school, get a good job, worked the same place till you retire. Like it just doesn't, it's not always a no-brainer like that anymore. So I think you really need to do the math, and it doesn't need to be you, right? Ask the experts, because not every property is going to make sense, whether it's for an investment property or even for yourself. Most people have way more home than they need, and it creates a ton of stress in their lives.
Absolutely.
I live very humbly for what we produce.
We'll keep talking about mortgages, but I also want to talk to the person listening right now. You know, if you look to what happened in 2008, it's the emotional buying again. Everyone's buying. So, you know, you run out there and you buy, and the prices are high. And this is where a lot of people are unsophisticated. And that's not a negative. That's a term for investing. Unsophisticated means that you just don't fully understand it yet. It doesn't mean that, you know, you're not clever. But you'll see so many people who lose so much because they're caught up in the emotion. And really, you know, in any kind of, you know, real estate strategy for us is buying when the market's down and then selling. Not necessarily, if we sell, we typically hold on and enjoy the cash flow. But if we sell, we don't sell at the very, very top. We want to sell below the top so we don't get caught out, which has happened as well if we are buying and selling. But buying and selling is not my particular strategy. Guys want to jump in on mortgages and home ownership? And
well, I might jump in on this one because I rent, which is kind of interesting. I guess maybe all of you guys have homes, but I might be the only renter here. There's a strategy behind that. I guess it stems from flexibility, simplicity. And I guess when we moved here and started paying rent, we didn't know if we're going to be here for 30 years. And just echoing what Courtney said about, is it going to be your forever home? I don't know if I could ever determine that. And so one of the things I see people do is they'll move to an area and buy a house, then 5 years later buy another one, and then another one, and they move around. And I reckon it costs them $100,000, $200,000 in transaction fees moving house all the time. So I'm definitely a proponent of what you guys do, where you go and buy a property investment and then rent. I think that's smart at the beginning, because you can hold that forever, that property investment. You don't have to move it around with transaction costs. But also with us, we have tax deductions for renting that serve us, and the simplicity of not paying, you know, insurance, not paying rates, not paying body corporate fees. That's a big thing for us. And we take the capital we typically pay off a mortgage and we put it into the share market at high returns on capital. So we are still investing, and I think it kind of confuses my friends as to why I don't buy a home. But I like to kind of go against the norm a bit. And, I think that's just serving us at the moment. That might change as we have a family. But at this point, I don't know if I'm going to be for the next 30 years. So I'm just going to keep renting until we figure that out.
Well, and as we mentioned earlier, now that interest that you're paying on the mortgage, you can write it off because it's an investment property versus your own primary residence, right? So yeah, I think Andrew is going to jump in there.
Well, I think, Dave, property is a really big thing for us, and something Angie and I have been doing for a number of years as well. But it all cycles back to, as we said last week, of what's your priority at the end of the day. And so for me, 15 years ago, when I was a single guy and I was just working my butt off in a business and was living very simply, I didn't need much. And so I knew that it was better for me to rent something very small, very close to work, and very simple and very cheap, because I knew that's all I needed right then, and I could be pouring everything else into property. And then, as you say as well, Dave, I think that we're sold this, just buy because it's guaranteed to go up, and that was what got everyone in trouble before the GFC, like in the US housing market particularly. And whether it's housing, whether it's stocks, whether it's commodities, cryptocurrencies, whatever, everything at the end of the day is driven by humans buying and selling. It's not really about the property, it's the human emotion buying and selling, as you said. And there's the FOMO, there's the greed and the FOMO and the panic and all the emotions that happen through the market cycles. So we're very similar to you, where we won't buy a property unless it's giving us cash flow. So unless it's giving us cash flow every week, we don't go into it. And then if it is, then we know that we can hold it through the ups and downs, and we can hold it for a very long time. But it came back to saying, you know what, I'm very happy to rent while I'm a single guy and I'm moving around and I don't want to be linked in. Now that I'm, married with a family, it's very different, and we've finally found where we want to be for a long period of time. So we are going to go in and buy the nice house and stuff like that. But it came from making those other decisions earlier that we could buy the nice house now. And so if you want to get into property, again, whatever market you want to get into, do not put a cent in until you understand it. And again, just go back to the library, read a few books on property before you put $50, $100, $200,000 into something on the hope that it's going to go up, or on the FOMO that you've missed the market and you better buy something now because everyone's doing property and everyone's making money. So again, it comes back to just education and knowing what's the best thing for you at the end of the day, and how do you get into that, and how do you understand it. And there's so much great information out there for free before you put money in.
Well, and before we start getting into investing money, some of the tips you've given already, which is the 10% and building, because a lot of people seem afraid to have money in the bank. It's like, I understand money should be working, but when you're starting out, and Courtney, you remember what that is, and you keep looking at that bank account, and there's another zero in there. It's like, holy crap. I mean, look, Sean, do you want to jump in on the whole mortgage thing?
Yeah, I think it's, listening to all of this, I was just trying to retrace, our process through it. And we have been, we've always had this philosophy about paying our mortgage down with an accelerated plan. So we have, the amount that we're supposed to pay, and then we've always paid on top, so that we take a 25-year mortgage and turn it into 18 or 17 or whatever. But yeah, and then what we had ended up doing is that, when the Canadian dollar was at par with the American dollar and the housing crisis hit, we actually ended up using the equity that we had built in our house to purchase a couple of properties in the US. And that's what creates some passive cash flow for us. So, I look at that, and I look at our mortgage right now as we moved into a different house. A lot of that, a good chunk of our mortgage is good debt, because it's the equity that we took to buy a couple of houses that are free and clear in the States, but they're on title in Canada in terms of how we owe the money, right? But that allowed us, again, this was a time where we were still working out how to get a pool of income to invest. But because we were aggressive with our house, it allowed us to access some money, even though we didn't have it at pool to a point where we had enough to say, yeah, let's go buy some houses with cash type thing, right? So that was our strategy at the time, because I didn't make a good income to really put the type of money aside to build it from there. But used a creative point that Lloyd was saying, which is just, I'm paying this on this property right now. Can I take what's available to me and then put it into a property in the States? And then since then, obviously our dollar is like the American dollar, and we get the exchange. So we're making money all kinds of different ways right now on those two American.
1.41 today.
Sorry?
1.41 today, the exchange.
Yeah, right. So like every time we get we had bought a property for $100,000 down there that returns right now $1,250 American rent, and one for $140 that returns $1,500 rent, and that's in American dollars that was bought at par, right? So I mean, that was opportunity. We were fortunate. We were looking to get into another property, but again, looking at the exchange, it didn't make sense.
You talk about timing though, because I mean, obviously it was very great timing, and a number of factors. The Canadian dollar was strong, but look at what happened. I mean, Phoenix was one of the worst hit places on the planet as far as the housing recession, and that. But then again, if we want to get ahead, spending when everyone else is selling is typically, whether it's like toys. I was just thinking about that in my head. If you go and buy a boat for this lake, they're $140,000, $160,000 brand new to have a ski boat. My first boat, and I was already a multimillionaire, I spent $6,000 on the side of the road here in Kelowna, and maybe I wasn't a multimillionaire then, but it was just my starting point. Cash, side of the road. I really wanted to get used to the lake, and then I went up another boat and then another boat. And it's just, but even the boat I just bought, and this is getting to a point, I paid $70,000 for this gorgeous boat. It's 15 years old. It's been looked after. It was inside for a lot of the years. It looks like brand new. And I have a billionaire friend who was on it recently and said, I just love this boat. And I paid 70 grand. And, if I bought that particular 36-foot cabin cruiser new, it's going to cost me, $350,000. Let's talk about that. What is bad debt? How do we, so that people leaving this call, they got a real understanding is what's good, what's bad. Let's define it a little bit more where people get trapped. So I just talked about boats, for example. What else comes to mind?
I think what I had just said, if I can just chime in on one piece, because I just mentioned that we took the equity in our home to buy properties that were going to create cash flow. So many people will take equity in their home and buy an RV trailer or buy a boat or buy, right? Because they use it as a way to get a lower interest loan than a Visa, a credit card, right? So, I mean, that's one thing that I see people, it's just all of a sudden it's this, I don't want to throw too many family members, right, under the bus here. I don't know if any of them will ever watch this, but it's like, it's been categorized as free money. Hey, it's free money. It's just right here, right? So why can't I buy the trailer? Why can't I buy the boat? Why can't I, whatever it is. But I think that's the trap, is that sometimes, the bad debt is money that's not working for us. It's money that's costing us. And our primary residence, as everybody has said, is not good debt. A lot of people will think because we own our home that's good debt because it's going up in value. It's not considered good debt. It's considered bad debt. So we want to get rid of that. But when you can take parts of it and turn it into some good debt, I believe that 60% of our mortgage interest is written off as good debt. So out of the 100%, 40% is the bad debt that we've got to hammer down all the time. But that would be one piece that comes to mind for me, David.
Awesome.
Sean, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier when we talked about the missed opportunity costs, and so because you were in a situation to purchase property when everyone couldn't afford to, and you could buy these amazing properties, like what you are making out of those assets because you had the money habits and everything in place earlier, right? So you were that's the opportunity that you had in your hands. And so I think it's a very simple equation for you, as you say, Dave, that this is not investment advice, obviously, but there's assets and liabilities, and an asset is something that feeds you and puts money into your pocket every day, and a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. It doesn't feed you. And so if you're going into debt, we want to be going ideally into debt for assets and not liabilities, because when a liability like your car, as you say, every week you've got to put fuel in the tank, and every week you've got to pay insurance, and every week it's going down in value. Whereas if you have assets like your rental properties, that every week you're getting a rental income, and there are expenses, interest and upkeep and management fees, but the rent is above the management fee, the rent is above the expenses, so you come out ahead and it puts food on your table every week. So understanding the asset versus liability. And so you go to the bank and normally they're like, what are your assets? And you're like, oh, my car and my home. And the bank are like, oh, great. They're saying that's an asset because they can take them off you. They're like, well, that's an asset for us because we can just take them off you if you don't miss your payments. But this house isn't an asset for us because it doesn't give us money every week. Our investment properties do. This one doesn't. This one takes money every week out of our pocket. But that's the one thing that we're doing as a family, while we'll put all our money into investment elsewhere.
Awesome. Anyone else?
I like what I think Lloyd kind of touched on it earlier when he mentioned somebody's got their RRSPs or 401ks and they're making 5%, yet they're carrying credit card debt at 20%, right? So the one thing that people seem to have grasped onto is like, you got to save for retirement, right? And so then they think like, okay, I got to save and I got to put something in here or I'm failing as a human, right? Meanwhile, they have all this debt. So really, being aware of that liability versus the asset and deciding where it needs to go.
Yeah, it's interesting with the RRSPs because I used to put money in, and I sat down with my financial advisor one day and I asked him a question. I said, can you tell me, how old are you? He's like 71. I said, and this is before I started really getting educated. I said, and you're still working because you want to or you have to? He said, I have to. I said, okay. And I'm sitting there thinking, hold on, this is the guy who's giving me advice and he's 71 and still working. And I'm thinking, that's it. I got to start investing my own money. That's what I started to really learn. Let's talk about budgets. I know we don't have a lot of time left on the show, but just to give, what is a realistic budget? And I know for spenders, all the spenders out there and the avoiders, you just got sick. And as I said that word, budget, right? Because for some people, like people love it, like Courtney and Sean, they're like, yeah, bring on the budget, right? But for the average person, what is a realistic budget? How does someone start? Let's just say before we leave them here, we talked a lot about debts. What's one way we can what's something they can start doing today that's going to create a result over the next, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, whatever?
Dave, can I just say before you talk like a specific number on the budget, there's the freedom is in the discipline. And again, if you cycle back to the mindset beforehand, is that there's no freedom in spending all your money every week and being stressed out about how you're going to pay your bills next week and then being tied to something you may not want to do to pay those bills kind of stuff. So there is people see budget as restrictive and they don't want to do it because no, that's boring and restrictive. But there's also so much freedom in the discipline of keeping your money in and putting it in the correct areas. And if you're disciplined, then you can understand, actually, we've got this money over here that we can allocate to having nice dinners, putting towards a holiday, and having the freedom and choice. And it just comes down to, again, changing that mindset on budgets aren't restrictive. Budgets are there to give you the freedom that you're chasing. We just need to understand that. And I did just laugh with what you're saying before. I always love the saying that Wall Street's the place where people in limos take advice from people who caught the subway. The people come in with their big money, and then the advisor giving them advice is probably caught the train and kind of stuff. And there is that paradox, like we say, that we get advice from the people who are maybe not in a position just yet themselves.
Well, they make money from giving advice. Right? It's which is or selling us something, right? They're going to get paid in accordance with what they can sell us. So again, it is a tricky road. Let's talk about budgets. Anyone want to jump in on that? Where's a good starting point?
I was just going to say, mine actually is almost in reverse because I didn't generally set out a budget at the beginning of the month, what I would do is enter all my receipts at the end of the month and see where my spending was, to bring that awareness for making choices the next month. And yes, then you could use that to apply a budget. But I still I loved knowing where my money was, and I was excited about allocating it and this and that. But the idea of a budget is, it's like constrictive. But I love having the choice and that awareness, so that I can say chocolate cake or fancy coffee or whatever, right? So keeping that tracking, doing that tracking and bringing that awareness in, so that maybe you only have one sort of area that's out of control, and you can decide that I'm just going to take out $200 in this envelope each month, and that's all I can spend on this thing, clothing, because I'm a crazy person when it comes to clothes, right? So you can, when you get that awareness of where the money's going, then you can adjust for yourself instead of putting this full blanket budget over everything.
Yeah.
I think if you automate your savings and investing, like I mentioned earlier, you don't need a budget. So once the money's gone and it's invested or it's set aside, you can spend it all down to zero. And I think if you're used to doing that, then do it that way, because then you don't even know it's gone. You can live your life on 90% of your income as much as you can 100% of your income. As long as the money goes first, then there's no room for a budget. Although if you're finding you just cannot do that and you're like, well, month at the end of the money, then I think just canceling a few subscriptions, going through your bank statements at the end of each quarter and figuring out you're having too much Uber Eats or you're having too many Netflix and Stans and Disney channels and stuff going through, then start canceling them. That's a good start. But again, I think if you're automating it all at the beginning, you don't need a budget.
I think one of the things that, those are good points. I think one of the things that we've really talked about is discipline, right? So for budget, I mean, my mind works a little bit to kind of manage where money's going, but if there was a formal budget thrown out in my house, the marriage wouldn't continue, right? Because we're not the same people. It would just not work, right? So what can we do that keeps us with a healthy relationship for, amount of time we've been together? We just think a little bit differently, but what we both subscribe to is, again, just that philosophy. So we pay ourselves first 10%, and then we pay 20% of the debts that we owe. What's interesting is that, I said we pay all our debts off, right? Now, every time we get paid, we still pay 20% to the debts that we owe. If there isn't a debt, it goes into this line of credit and it just builds up. And it's actually allowed us, because we haven't gone into debt, it's accrued itself, so that instead of using a credit card to do a little renovation in our house, we were able to pay cash, because we paid the debts that we owed ahead of time, if that makes any sense. So we're able to do it, like, we just keep the habit of it, and then we live on 70%. So like Lloyd said, is like, when the money starts to run out, we start looking at each other and going, oh, well, sushi tonight? Nope. We're going to have to make something that's in the fridge, right? Like, it's just, the money starts, we just manage it that way. We have joint accounts, so we see what's in there. We both have responsibility. I know there's different ways that couples will do it, separate accounts or joint accounts. We've always had a joint account. So for us, budgetary, we see what we have in there, and then we just make decisions. But every time we get paid, it's just zip here, zip there, and we live on the rest.
I don't have a budget as such, but I'm a spreadsheeter. Maths nerd from high school. So I do love my Excel spreadsheet. But I guess, we've got a lot of properties and a couple of different businesses and stuff. And so there's lots of money coming in and out. But as Lloydie said, I've also gone to the bank and made sure, it all goes in on the same day and it all goes out, the next day and stuff like that. So it is all quite clean and automated in that regard. But then there's just the spreadsheet, and essentially each financial year, a month or so before the financial year, I just create that spreadsheet, and it honestly takes 20 minutes. It sounds like labor sim. It takes me 20 minutes. And because it's all repetitive, week in, week out. You create the spreadsheet, and then you just know, over the last year, what was your kind of average credit card bill each month? What was the, when the expenses are coming out, when the big expenses are coming out, you put them all in the spreadsheet, and you can see at the end of the year what's going to be left over. And if that start each week, then I go and update it, because there's always, week to week things, and something good happens or something bad happens. And if that starts to go down and that starts to dwindle, then it's like, okay, righto. Like, we obviously need to adjust, but we're adjusting with 10 months of lead time. It's not like the week before we know we're running out of money. We know that end of year budget is increasing or decreasing. And so we're adjusting our spending, micro adjustments as we go, to make sure that we're always hitting that target at the end of each year.
Yeah. I've printed off the top 10 questions asked. And again, there's lots of different ones. I looked at different sites. I'm just going to ask one before we go. I already cut corners with my budget, skipping lattes, packing lunch. It's still not enough. What now? And so I just want to throw that one out there as a what now. And I mean, a lot of people have too much month at the end of the money. A lot of people don't understand the idea of a real side hustle or, additional incomes. And a lot of people don't have anything to start with creating passive income. But I wonder, what's some of your thoughts around that person who asked that question? This is one of the most commonly asked questions. I'm already doing everything. There's not enough money.
Yeah, I might field that one. It comes up a lot. I mean, people are like, I'm working 2 jobs, I'm doing this. I'm like, what are you doing? You're working 2 jobs. You have no time to spend any money. What are you doing? What are you spending it on? If you got 2 jobs, like 80 hours a week. I wonder. I wish I could kind of be a fly on the wall as to where they spend it. But if there truly is, like if they have a family and there's a lot of school fees and things like that, and there's a mortgage, and there are these cars and assets that don't produce, and they're taking a lot of cash flow, and both parents are working, then sometimes after tax, there is too much month end of the money. But I think rather than get a second job, I think there's so many things you can do now with technology that produces more income. You just have to shift your mindset towards it. So like with me, I'm like, where is my, with opportunity cost, every time we do something with our time, it's costing something. So for example, if you've got a good 100 hours in your working time a week, or 80 hours a week of working time, where is that being spent? Is it being spent on something that produces income, or is it being spent on something that takes income? So if you look at something like, okay, well, if I put an app in place called Poorshake, I can rent, I can look after a dog and I can get paid $100 a week for that. That's one form of income. Then I can put, students into my spare rooms, and that will give me another income, or Airbnb one of my rooms. Then I can turn my car into an income on the weekends with a bit of Uber. And then I can have a side hustle where I can turn my groceries into an income, which is obviously network marketing. So looking at these 4 or 5 different side hustles and just and laser focusing on a couple of them, and taking the time you would have spent at the beach, wherever it might have been, and starting to use that time to produce income until you get ahead. And if you're spending every morsel of your time producing income, I think that whole equation of I don't have enough money is going to go away, and you're going to have way more cash flow. So
I just want to echo what you just said there, because it's so important. That I remember when I was broke, right? I mean, I just worked my ass off, and I had this desire to move ahead and to have what other people had. And I realized that, I didn't have an education. So it was a question, like you said it, hey, it may not be a long-term thing, and I remember working all day and working nights, and not sleeping on a lot, but I worked on the weekends at a market store, because it was just like, hey, I just knew that was my only option at that point. I didn't know about network marketing then. It was just a question of, but I was able to save money. I was able to get ahead. I was able to buy a house, but it was bloody hard work as well, right?
Yeah.
Anyone else want to jump on?
I would just say reaching out to people to talk to them that are doing what you'd like to do, or like if you keep using your own tool, you're going to keep having the same results. So reach out, like get those books, talk to people that are doing what you want to do, find a mentor, and talk about it.
Let's talk about money.
Yeah.
We're talking about money. Sean?
I think, okay, we'll finish off with Andrew then. I would only say, I think everybody's had great answers. The only thing that comes to mind for me would be just redirecting the question back to them. Like, what what strategies are they currently employing in their life, you know, and is it learning or is it trying the side hustles, but even just paying themselves first, something so simple like what we started the call with. You know, again, the resistance would be the 10%. I'm saving this, I'm saving that. But what is the actual strategy they're employing? And it's hard, you know, to really understand somebody's circumstance until you find out a little bit about what creates the circumstance. So understanding that piece, but I just think that the 10% first creates such a little win, you know, and it can empower somebody to be just the ripple effect where they can then believe they can do that. And then it just becomes a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. So that would be my advice, you know, starting with something simple like that. And then hoping that they follow through on it.
Awesome. Andrew, put your time in, Lloyd.
We spoke last week. I think, you know, if your bank account is a bucket and there's lots of holes in the bucket, you know, we've either got to close up some of those holes or we've got to get creative, like Lloyd said. And desperation can often lead to a lot of creativity. You know, like it's in those times when no one buys umbrellas when the sun's shining, right? It's only when the rain, and then we're kind of like, oh, actually we need to act. So Lloydie came up with all these great ideas of how you can get creative to try and add another hose to the top of the bucket, or you do have to get brutal with covering up some of the holes. But I think, to me, it does come down to, as humans, we strive for balance. And it's like, you know, how do I find more balance in my spending and in my saving and in my work and all that? And I think we just understand that the balance also means that you want to stay exactly still. You know, a balanced person standing on one foot is staying in the exact same position. That's the definition of balance. So if you're saying I'm struggling to get through each month, but I'm striving for balance, then you're also saying, like, please let me stay in the exact same position. So we have to understand that you have to have that mindset of how can I create something or how can I reduce something, and I am going to have to be unbalanced for a certain period of time. But the only way to move one direction is to live an unbalanced life for a certain period of time. And then and then we tend to, like, oh, there's money in the bank. Suddenly we go unbalanced like the other way. And it's like, oh, fell over.
Yeah.
And I had like $500 new boat. And we've like spent it all and we've gone back the other way. But just understanding that the only way to move forward is to be unbalanced somewhat. So you've got to get creative, or you've got to get brutally strict at the bottom end of the bucket. And it's more fun to be creative. Let's be honest. Not that you should just let it pour out the other end, but it's far more fun being creative than like just plugging all those holes all day long.
Yeah, awesome. Listen, again, it's just the time. Last time we went so long. I want to just keep inviting you back. I mean, these conversations are so great. I'm loving it. You know, if no one was listening and this wasn't going out anywhere, it would still be great to sit around and have these kinds of conversations. And so I do thank you all, and hopefully we'll be doing it again soon. But just everyone, just so it's called My Extra Mile, because it's about those small incremental steps. And there's so much good stuff on this particular show with regards to simple things that you can start doing today to be able to create the life you want. So I thank you. I appreciate you. And we'll see you on the other side.